Chapter 2. The Eternal Sonship of Christ. The subject of our opening chapter was the eternal pre-existence of Christ. The question now before us is whether in his pre-existence he was the Son of God, or whether he became so at his incarnation. Many scriptures which testify to his divine sonship might, apart from passages to the contrary, be regarded as suggesting, and have been so understood, that he became the Son of God at his birth, and that this title applies to him only from that time onward. Should we find, however, that there are scriptures which demonstrate his eternal sonship in the past, we must understand the other passages in this light. In the epistle to the Galatians, the apostle states that, when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. Galatians 4, verse 4. The reference plainly is to his being sent forth from heaven to earth by incarnation, and not to any subsequent mission in the days of his flesh. This passage clearly indicates that God sent forth one who was already his Son. We may not read it as if it meant that God sent forth one who in his birth became his Son, any more than the parallel statement in verse 6, God sent forth the Spirit of his Son, Revised Version, could be taken to mean that God sent forth one who became his Spirit at the sending. The Spirit of God, sent forth at Pentecost, had ever been his Spirit. Similarly, verse 4 implies that he whom God sent forth was already his Son. The Lord's testimony. With this agree the Lord's own statements recorded in the Gospel of John. He says to the disciples, "Ye have believed that I came forth from the Father. I came out from the Father, and am come into the world. Again, I leave the world, and go unto the Father." John 16, verses 27 and 28. In this, he gives a plain intimation of his pre-existent relationship as the Son prior to the incarnation. Some have considered his statement, "I came out from the Father," as pointing to an eternal procession from the Father in the past, or what has been termed the eternal generation of the Son. This, however, does not seem to be the Lord's meaning here. His statement, "Again, I leave the world and go unto the Father," expresses the reversal of his procedure mentioned in the first part of the verse. His going unto the Father is the antithesis of his coming out from the Father. What the Lord is teaching in this passage is not the interrelations of deity in the abstract, but his mission from the Father as having been sent by him into the world. His words to the disciples are to be compared with his previous utterance to the Jews. "I came forth and am come from God, for neither have I come of myself, but he sent me." Here again the reference is plainly to his mission and not to his person. The testimony of John's first epistle. The Apostle John, in the introduction to his first epistle, says, "The life was manifested, and we have seen, and bear witness, and declare unto you the life, the eternal life, which was with the Father, and was manifested unto us." 1 John chapter 1, verse 2. He does not here say that he who was the life was with God, but that he was with the Father. The term Father implies the existence of a Son. The terms Father and Son are co-relative. In no other sense than that of pre-existent fatherhood and sonship can the apostle have made such a statement. There is no hint in the scriptures of any time at which God began to be a father. Yet the above scriptures make clear that his fatherhood in relation to Christ was pre-existent to the incarnation. The fatherhood of the one being eternal, the sonship of the other must likewise have been eternal. In the light of this introductory statement in the epistle, we are to understand the subsequent statement in chapter 4, verse 14. The Father hath sent the Son to be the Saviour of the world. It was a Father who sent and a Son who came. His only begotten Son. These scriptures provide us with the interpretation of other passages. When we read, for instance, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, John 3 verse 16, the statement may not be taken to mean that Christ became his only begotten Son by incarnation. That would rob the verse of its meaning and force. The value and greatness of the gift lay in the sonship of him who was given. His sonship was not the effect of his being given. The expression only begotten, which as used of Christ is only found in John's Gospel and his first epistle, does not refer to his incarnation. In the Gospel, he says, we beheld his glory, glory as of, literally an, only begotten from the literally a Father. Chapter 1, verse 14. Not as in the authorized version of the Father. From rightly translates the word para. The same preposition is used in his words in chapter 7, verse 29. I am from him, and he sent me. The glory was that of a Father's only begotten, the sole representative and manifestation of the being and character of the one who sent him in virtue of the relationship. In other words, the glory to which John refers was the outshining of a unique, eternal, only begotten sonship. In this relationship, he came from heaven to earth on his Father's mission. In that same eternal sense, we are to understand the statements that the only begotten Son is in the bosom of the Father. Chapter 1, verse 18. And that of chapter 3, verse 16, already quoted, compared with chapter 3, verse 18. This is made clear from what the Apostle says in his first epistle, that God hath sent his only begotten Son into the world that we might live through him. 1 John chapter 4, verse 9. The sending was by way of his incarnation, and not subsequent to it. That he is the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, expresses both his eternal union with the Father in the Godhead and the ineffable intimacy and love between them, the Son sharing all the Father's counsels and enjoying all his affections. The form of expression used in the original and rendered which is indicates that the bosom of the Father ever has been and ever will be the Son's dwelling place. Only then, in the sense of unoriginated relationship, are we to understand the term only begotten when used of the Son. The word Son, in the case of the Son of God, speaks of him as the perfect archetype of all that the word connotes, whether in human relation or divine. The expression only begotten tells of the uniqueness of that relation in his case. the term begotten. That the word begotten should be used of the Son's relationship to the Father does not imply any beginning to his sonship. It suggests relationship indeed, but must be distinguished from generation as applied to man. To endeavour to shape our ideas of divine relationship according to our knowledge of human relationships is simply to betray our ignorance. The finite mind cannot conceive of that which is infinite. Our limitations of time and sense forbid our full apprehension of the eternal. Yet God has conveyed the facts relating to himself in language the phraseology of which we can understand, though the facts themselves lie outside the range of human conception. The Father's utterance, predictively recorded in Psalm 2 verse 7, "Thou art my Son, this day have I begotten thee," and quoted in Acts 15 verse 33, Hebrews 1 verse 5 and 5 verse 5, is to be distinguished from those passages which we have been considering, which speak of Christ as the only begotten. This latter signifies, as we have seen, an eternally pre-existing relationship. The utterance in Psalm 2 and its quotations point to a distinctive occasion, whether the incarnation or the resurrection. The term firstborn. Again, the title firstborn, Colossians 1 verse 15 and 18, Romans 8 verse 29, Hebrews 1 verse 6, Revelation 1 verse 5, as used of Christ, does not imply a beginning of his being, nor does it class him with his creatures. It indicates the dignity of his preeminence over them. When, for instance, the Apostle Paul speaks of him as the firstborn of all creation, Colossians 1 verse 15, the mode of expression in the original and the context of the passage sufficiently guard against the idea that Christ is to be classed with the creation itself. The idiomatic form of expression distinguishes him from all created beings, and declares his priority and superiority to them. The next verse is explanatory of this title, and shows that instead of being created, he was himself the creator. The term only begotten is absolute. As such, Christ stands alone in a timeless relationship with the Father. The term firstborn is relative. It does distinguish him from all creatures, but it brings them in view so as to show his infinite superiority to them. Human recognition of his sonship. In the days of his earthly ministry, the recognition of his divine relationship as the Son of God, in whatever connection the title was used, was not based upon a recollection of his superhuman birth, but upon the exhibition of his divine attributes. For even in his manhood while on earth, these were always his, even though they might not always be in exercise. For instance, Nathanael's confession, "Rabbi, thou art the Son of God," John 1 verse 49, drawn from him by the display of the Lord's omniscience, was contingent not upon Nathanael's possible acquaintance with the fact of the divine character of Christ's birth, but upon a recognition of his divine personality. Still more suggestive is Martha's confession, the result of the evidences of his divine attributes. "I have believed that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, even he that cometh into the world." John 11 verse 27. A recognition at once of his pre-existence as well as his divine sonship. The same is true of the effects of his omnipotence in stilling the storm, or when the disciples worshipped him, saying, "Of a truth, thou art the Son of God." Matthew 14, verse 33. Such is the case also with the testimony of those who were possessed of demons, who at the putting forth of his power to deliver the victims of this thraldom cried out, "Thou art the Son of God." Luke 4, verse 41. What Christ had been in the past eternity was now known among men. The Son prior to creation. The writer of the Hebrews epistle states that the words of Psalm 102, verse 25, "Of old hast thou laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou shalt endure," were addressed by the Father to the Son. That is to say, the utterance was spoken to the Son as such, long prior to his incarnation. He was then already the Son when he created the heavens and the earth. Hebrews 1, verse 8 and 10. This makes clear the meaning of verse 2. It is in a Son that God has spoken to us. The omission of the definite article or pronoun serves to emphasize the relationship. It is true that he has spoken to us through a Son incarnate, but it is also through him that he made the worlds, proving that his sonship did not begin at his incarnation. Again, the Epistle to the Hebrews states that the brief biography of Melchizedek in Genesis was so shaped that by the omission of his parentage and his death, he was made, i.e. in the inspired narrative, like unto the Son of God. And the similarity lay in this, that he had neither beginning of days nor end of life. Accordingly, it was as the Son of God that Christ was without beginning of days. His sonship was therefore unoriginated and eternal. He that confesseth the Son. Disbelief in the eternal pre-existent sonship of Christ, while acknowledging God as everlasting Father, is transgression of his express word, that all should honour the Son even as they honour the Father. John 5, verse 23. To deny the eternity of the Son while admitting it in the case of the Father cannot be ascribing equal honour to them. Whoso denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father. He that confesseth the Son hath the Father also. Let us see to it that we abide in the truth, that we may abide in the Son and in the Father. 1 John 2, verses 23 and 24. Only as we rightly consider the excellencies of his eternal glory as the Son of God can our hearts be bowed in due adoration of him who stooped to the death of the cross in order to bring us nigh to God.